So good morning, everyone. I am very excited to be here today and to be moderating the opening panel of the CRISPRcon 2019. I'm honored to be sitting here next to such a wonderful list of distinguished panelists, and I will be introducing them to you as we start the conversation. 2 words about me first. As introduced initially, my name is Erika, and I run an organization called Reimagine Europa. I'm not a scientist. My background is in philosophy and political science. But I have over a decade of experience in working between science, policy, and society, and in building narratives and how do you talk about things in a different way. Now, I work in Brussels, and it was very good that I was reminded not to use jargon earlier today, because if I was going to say this in Brussels, it would probably sound something like, I work together with Tham and Stoa at the EP, and together with the JRC, we're working on the ramification of the ECJ verdict. And so, you know, this is, I think that's, and that's a lot how often when scientists talk to me, that's what I hear. And I think this is very important to remember that, and that we need to talk differently, because we're not only translating different languages when we talk in these international contexts, but we're also translating between the jargon of different sectors. So it's fascinating for me to be here today with these panelists who have come here to share their personal stories, because that's, I think, how you really understand the impact of these technologies. I think we're all agreed with the science, and the science is all excellent, but the harder part is not in the science. The hardest part is how does the science get accepted in society, and how do we decide to use these technologies? And that's really the position where I'm coming from. So we work, as I said, with the scientific advice mechanism of the European Commission and the group of chief scientific advisors. And earlier this year, we held an event on genome editing in agriculture and the implications in society to create a conversation with policy, people from policy, with members of the European Parliament, with civil society organizations, and really, I think, very much in the ethos of this event here to create a conversation, because I think that's really what is going to be most important in the years to come with this complex technology. But I would just like to, with this as a basis, present and introduce the panelists. I would like to start with Sijas Akkerman, who is here. He is the director of the Nature and Environment Federation of the Netherlands. He's a very active man. He's working in relation between government, companies, consumers, and science. He has a number of different projects, just to number a few, the 5 food forests, the Biodiversity Delta Plan. And what I really like, when we were talking earlier, is that his motto is, there is always a way to Rome, if you know where Rome is. Now, Sijas, where is Rome for you, and what is the narrative that anchors your work?
Rome in my personal life, or Rome related to this conference?
I would say let's start related to this conversation.
Then I think it's good to focus it on agriculture. I think Rome for agriculture is an agriculture without the use of fertilizers, without the use of pesticides, with a good condition of the soil, with biodiversity trends going up instead of going down, with insects increasing instead of decreasing. And I think we have, especially in the Western countries, a lot of work to do to reach that kind of Rome. And for me, it's also important that there's not one way to Rome. It's when you talk about breeding and breeding technologies, I think there are at least 3 roads to Rome. One is the ecological, biological way of breeding. Another way is the more, I would say, traditional or normal way of breeding. And perhaps also new breeding technologies, as we discussed it these 2 days, can contribute to Rome, and that also can be one of the roads. But that's a road we are just entering now, just starting to walk on. So we have to be very carefully, and set very little steps, because we don't know exactly what is that road going to lead to.
And do you have a feeling that there is a general sense in society of where Rome is, or is that maybe the initial problem?
No, I think at least in the Netherlands, the discussion about where Rome is that there's a lot of common sense about it. Between the industry, between farmers, between NGOs, we all agree that agriculture has to be much more sustainable than it now is, and that and all the companies, all the scientists are willing to contribute to making agriculture more sustainable.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to then introduce Anne Michiels. Anne is now working at Syngenta, but she used to, and she's here actually as the former head of R&D as Hazira, and she has, which is a seed company. She's a scientist with a lot of experience working both for big companies as well as small companies, having founded one herself. So Anne, as a scientist, how do you view the possibilities of gene editing and new breeding technologies? And how are the current narratives around these technologies affecting your work and your approach to these technologies?
Thank you, Erika, for that question. As a scientist, but also being raised on a farm, on a high-tech tomato farm, and also being a mother of 2 kids that I want to feed healthy and good food, I really believe in sustainable agriculture. And with all the challenges, it's the classic narrative with growing population, less resources available. We need to do that in a way to leave less of a footprint in the environment. I believe we need all the brains, all the ideas, all the people, just like in this conference, to think about that. And I also believe that CRISPR-Cas is a technology that can really contribute to that. It's not the holy grail. It will be part of many technologies we need to bring to provide sustainable agriculture in the future. And I really believe with my breeding background, where I worked for companies that bring seeds to farmers, that it is a way to bring novel traits or already existing traits in nature in a faster way into our seed product, so we can bring to the farmer and the consumer healthy products that contribute to a society where we all want to happily live in, as a farmer, as a mother, as a scientist, as somebody who works for a company.
I think
that's what I believe.
Wonderful, and as you saw before, food was a very clear concern when it came to what people are looking for when it comes to this technology, and also obviously the fear of misuse of that is, I think, the biggest concern. We mentioned before the ruling of the European Court of Justice earlier this year. Is this something that you feel has affected the way that you work on these technologies and how it can also be used to the good?
I think when the news came with many of the colleagues, either in academia or in institutes or in companies, there was really the coffee talk for several days. We were hoping that technology would be a way for us to also in the smaller companies and in the smaller crops where it's quite a challenge to use technology because the markets are very diverse. We have a lot of markets that are global, that are in areas where agriculture is in Africa and Latin America, where agriculture is really done in a different way. We were really hoping that this technology could help us to speed up bringing these new seeds to the markets, and that it can help us to come up with new traits that, because of the climate change also, we have areas where we have much more insect or fungal manifestations because of climate change. So sometimes it's really a race for the community, for the farmer, and then also for us as a breeder to come with seeds that have a resistance and a natural resistance to this problem. And we were hoping that we could use this technology. Now with the change in regulation, we have to, because we also have a big market in Europe, it has affected the way we think and the way we work. So I'm very much looking forward to this conference, and mostly to learn and to hear from others. As for me also, misuse is one of the worries that keeps me awake at night.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. Now I'd like to introduce you to Alfred Grand. Alfred is an organic arable field farmer and entrepreneur from Austria. He has his organic family farm has been converted into Grand Farm for research and demonstration. He's very much involved in several activities at the European Innovation Partnership for Agriculture and a range of Horizon 2020 projects. He's won several innovation awards and is co-author of the book Make Your Own Fertilizer. So, Alfred, we've just been talking about the importance of sustainable farming and organic, and I think you are emblematic of really of this movement and of this narrative that we're seeing developing and becoming stronger and stronger. But you also work a lot with innovative approaches to organic farming. How does new breeding technologies fit into your story and into your narrative?
Okay, so first of all, thanks to the organizer to invite me, and I really enjoy and I really appreciate this conference, because bringing different perspectives together is really what we need to see with these such topics. For me, as an organic farmer or as an Austrian farmer, it is the situation is that I have to have a systemic approach. So as an organic farmer, I cannot only focus on one goal. I cannot say, okay, I want to have big yields, high yields, this is my focus, but then I will reduce the fertility of my soil by the time, and I will lose my farm. And so I have to see the big picture, and this is really where I see the concerns, because I understand that the researcher is going for a very specific question, so he's approaching a specific problem and developing a new breed or a new variety, for example, for use in agriculture. But I have to see the big picture, and therefore, because of a series of different reasons, I'm quite worried a little bit about the technology.
I love the fact that you mentioned the word big picture, because one of the things that I find really interesting is that this session is obviously about narratives and stories, and usually when you tell a story, you're focusing on one side, you choose an angle and you say that. And isn't this complexity, as you mentioned, of nature, where everything is interlocked, so by changing something little, maybe you have no idea what's going to affect. Is that what you think is lacking in the sense of narrative that is developing around new breeding technologies, that it's only about one question as opposed to seeing the bigger?
Yeah, so one big issue that I have is the loss of biodiversity. So we have to get a range of different varieties. And if scientists develop, a company develop certain varieties that give certain benefit for the farmer, for example, reduction of pesticide use, then these varieties tend to dominate the market. And then you have a series of risks that evolve. And if we compare it just with the nature, with our planet, the planet or nature is only so successful because we have that diversity of plants, we have that diversity of microbes, of animals. So for each different environmental condition, there is some organism there who fits into that small slot. And if we get dominated, then probably we end up with similar problems that we face now, because we as a human dominate the planet now, and we see where that leads. So we have a loss of biodiversity, we have problems with our climate. So that's a kind of domination on the planet, and probably that could be the same risk if we have a dominating wheat variety or corn variety or soybean variety, something similar.
I think that is fascinating. I think we'll come back to that during the conversation, of course, because as you also mentioned, human beings have already had a huge effect. So I think on biodiversity and questions like that. So, how can technologies both help and how can they challenge, I think, is the biggest questions. What I really like about this panel is we reflect very well the representation in the audience in terms of interests. So now we will move away from agriculture and food, and I want to pass the word to, I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly, to Kabasinguzi Betty Kaahwa. And Betty is a businesswoman working near the Uganda Virus Research Institute. She's married and with 3 children. She holds a diploma in fisheries management and technology, and she worked with the National Agricultural Advisory Services as a sub-county coordinator before she joined the business world. Now, Betty, you have a very interesting personal story, and I think you come from a very different perspective than our previous panelists. And I wanted to ask if you could share your experience and how you think that new breeding technologies and gene editing can contribute to your life as well as work.
Thank you, Erika. I come from the continent of Africa, and from Uganda in particular. And me being brought on this board, it is mainly target malaria. When I talk about malaria, most of the whites might not be knowing about malaria, but malaria is the most challenging health issue in Africa, mainly in Uganda. So, as target malaria people who work from Uganda Virus Institute, they moved around, told us about the new method they are trying to find out which can help to target malaria, mainly the female Anopheles mosquito, since it's the one bringing the spread of malaria. So, as a community member, I really see, one, I first appreciate the organizers and even the target malaria as a group, because of most years, people have been working out in laboratories as scientists. You find out some other scientific methods to help the community, but when the community doesn't know exactly what you are doing, and yet you're trying to help them. But I appreciate, because for this specific gene editing, they passed around our area, and I happen to be working near the Uganda Virus Institute. They told us about the gene editing method that they want to do on malaria, mainly on Anopheles mosquito. And I saw it is more important. Why? Because I'm one of the people who has been affected by malaria as a person, or even as the entire community. When you assess and you really see the main challenge is malaria. As in my assessment or in my personal experience, I've been affected by malaria. As they have told you, I'm a mother of 3 children. I have a set of twins. But during that time when I was pregnant, around 4 months, I happened to have together challenge of malaria. I would sleep under mosquito nets. I would do whatever I could, but I don't know how the malaria had to attack me, and I almost lost the babies. The only thing they would tell me, we can either save you or save the babies. And you really see all of us need health, and we need life. So, but thanks be to the scientists that if at all they are trying to find out a method which can help to cover the entire community, the entire nation, even other people, even if it's not in other continents, but as we get most whites coming to Uganda, they also get challenged with malaria. So, as a person, I see the gene editing method, which would really cover up the Anopheles mosquito, would be the best tool, because for those ones who don't know, we have other control tools in Uganda to control malaria, like mosquito nets, like insecticides. But in most cases, the insecticides are not really affordable by everybody, as our economic status is not so well. And even the mosquito nets, at times the government tries to supply us nets, but you find in a family of 10, they give around 3 people. And now if you can only help the 3 people, what about the entire family? So even the few that have the mosquito nets, you find putting them is a challenge. Most people just sleep down. You have no beds where to fit the mosquito nets. So others even prefer using the mosquito nets as fishing nets. So you rather keep your net to go and use it for fishing, other than covering it on your bed and helping your health. So I really welcome this, and even for the few people that I've tried to tell about the gene editing method concerning the Anopheles mosquito, they really appreciate, as a society, they say, if at all we could get a tool which can be better than these other methods which are there, that even during the day, when you're doing your work, even if a mosquito bit you, you're not worried. But these other methods which are mostly there, they only help us in the night, and which are just few hours. So you find during the day a mosquito bites you anytime you're sick, or your child is sick, or even the customers are sick, because I have a business, I do some business. But you find most of my customers are affected by malaria, and they keep coming to request for help. Instead of bringing you cash, they will just tell you, you just lend me, because they're taking the money to the hospital. So
I think there might be a slight problem with your microphone. But see if it's... Okay, so whilst we wait for old technologies to be fixed, I will like to introduce you to our last panelist, Father Joseph Tham from the Regina Apostolorum Pontifical University. He is a former dean of the School of Bioethics, and he's where he presently teaches. And he is a fellow of the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics and Human Rights. He's the author and editor of numerous articles and books. But you started off by majoring in mathematical science and graduating from medical school, working initially as a family physician. So you have a very broad spectrum on these questions. So my question to you would really be, would you like to give us some insights into the recent events that we could see earlier, when China popped up? You've got a lot of experience, or some experience with that, and also into your view, if there is a way to approach the future of gene editing in a way that is responsive to science, ethics, and Catholic theology. Complex questions.
Yes. So, I think I was there in November or December last year when that news was made public. I was in a conference in North-Holland University when Professor He gave the explanation of what he did. I think there was, I guess, a public media outcry about basically what people feared for a long time about this misuse that you talked about of designer babies. I think that was basically one phrase that we could use. At that conference, I guess, several things came out. One is that in general, people were upset with him, the scientists, and also people who were there. They felt that he was kind of like, they labeled him as a rogue scientist, saying that he was irresponsible, what he did was unsafe, unproven, and he really did it on his own without telling other people. So there are many ethical issues in his case. But then also I felt that it's almost like they blame it all onto him, that this is him as an exception, whereas kind of they're saying, trying to protect the scientific enterprise, saying that, well, we are not like that. We can self-regulate and we are. But I think there's also something there that has produced the effect. This professor, basically he was a product of science in the sense that he needs to be number one, to be the first to have done this, or the fame, or the, basically, the grants, all these things, the business aspect of it is, he's a product as well of this whole way science is being done today. I think that's also something that we should talk about, why he did what he did, because he really felt what he was doing was right. So I felt that he was kind of like a little bit of a scapegoat, and also, in a sense, the scientists there weren't saying that what he did was wrong, but it's almost like saying that, well, he jumped the gun. He did it now when we are not ready. We need to prepare the public, but really, in the long run, we might want to go there, but not yet. So that's the sense I got. I could be a bit cynical, but that was my impression at that place. And my reflection basically is that, from a Catholic perspective, is that once we've accepted IVF, in vitro fertilization, and basically experimentation with embryos, I think this is a logical consequence. Because once you can look at the embryo as a thing that you could manipulate and work on and improve, the whole technology-driven mentality is how you improve this, how you improve this, how you improve this. So if the embryo is a product that you want to improve, the next stage of improvement would be hardware, which is a gene. So this is kind of like the golden grail of genetic engineering on human beings. So that's the line that somehow has been crossed. Can we withdraw the line? Can we say that, no, we don't want to go there? Or is science going in such a way that you can't really stop it because the logic of science just pushes it to a higher and higher and more perfect technique that you can't really stop it? I mean, that's a question that is being raised, I think, that, out of that.
Today.
Yeah.
And do you think that the narratives around that is the story behind, is that having an impact on how you see science develop in this?
I think the narratives behind it that I think is very interesting to look at is basically a question of how traditions, be they religious or cultural or faith-based traditions, is able to engage science and technology in a fruitful dialogue. I think there is something that needs to be done there that is still very immature. I think there's not a very good dialogue there. The sciences that just seems to be very focused on the technology, or the means. Let's do this, let's perfect this, let's go ahead. Whereas traditional or culture would look at the ends. Why are we doing this? Is this really for the common good? Is this really for the for good of humanity? And I think those kind of questions would be very interesting to explore more. The question between tradition and traditional ethics and science, also the question between the ends and the means.
That's very interesting. I remember in a conversation with Emanuele Severino, an Italian philosopher, and he wrote this brilliant book about it's really about science and faith and the church. And he said when there is no control, but his point was really when society stops being aware of what's happening, you enter into chaos, because there is no. And I think that's quite an interesting analogy to what maybe we're potentially seeing here on if we don't continue these conversations, which is why we're here. But I wanted to briefly now, Betty, that you're back in the game. I wanted to give you the opportunity to continue your conversation, but also to say, how do you think the conversation around these technologies are different in Uganda and in your region compared to maybe what angles that are being chosen here in Europe or in the United States of discussing these technologies?
This method, which has mainly the genetics, because it's new in Uganda, new in Africa, almost in most African countries. So we find it's more important that we explain to the society, especially, what this gene editing issue is all about. So one, we are, as a society person, we are just worried these genetics which are coming, mosquitoes, the new modified mosquitoes, if they're genetically modified, what if they release them in the society? Won't they even bring other problems other than malaria? So that's the biggest question that we have. Apart from, you could be helping us targeting malaria, but this modified mosquito could also come with its own problem. But which I believe, and I try to ask, because they told us, the researchers, they have some research body that controls all that. Before you release some specific tool that you're going to use, they have to first test it out. Though that is a fear in the most community, that even when they release these mosquitoes which are modified from the lab, they might come when they are so much worried to people's health. But I realize that it's just a fear from us as lay people. But I believe the scientists are really doing that. And as a common person, we just think, if at all this modified mosquito comes and the project ends somewhere in the middle, and it's might be because of the financial constraints or what, are we really sure that these new modified mosquitoes will not breed into another breed of these modified mosquitoes and these other wild mosquitoes which have been there, and it ends up to be a confusing issue. But I believe if at all the scientists have found out that the modified mosquitoes are going to really be the best tool to help us I know they may not stop in just on the way. They'll just have to continue with it. Though we wait at the other side, we see it so much positive because we see currently as the best tool to control malaria in our nation. Since this one covers all of us, it covers the children, covers the high class and the low class, and even other people who are not of our nation, you'll find it will help the entire body other than using some specific methods.
Brilliant. I mean, I think, thank you, first of all, for all your introduction and your different narratives, because you're really coming from very different perspectives. And we're now going to start the conversation part of this, having had a good introduction. And remember, you can all come with questions if you want. There won't be questions with hands up as in the old days, because we're all about new technologies here. So you have to use your app, and I will be seeing the questions as they come up. So I will be filtering and putting them into there. So please be engaged and come with your questions. I'll put on my glasses so you can see. I will pay attention. Now I can actually see properly. And so what I think is fascinating with this is we've really seen very different perspectives. And what the cognitive scientist George Lakoff always says, of course, if you change the conversation, you will change how people's emotions react to a technology. And is this something that you agree with? And during this debate, have you felt or have you seen some other perspectives that make you maybe reconsider other perspectives of where people are coming from when they approach the debate around genome editing? Maybe Sijas, maybe you want to start.
I think it's good to have these discussions in little rooms with people you can see. But the big problem or the big issue is that you have to translate this discussion to society, to a lot of people who are not as involved in the team as we are. And I think that's not so easy. And the more narratives you have, the more difficult it is for society, for people, and for politicians also to have a good debate about it. And I think especially politicians, what's the...
Politicians.
The people in The Hague, in the Netherlands, are not talking much in a broad and a lot of different perspectives. I think the political debate is more of the debate of the one-liners. And I think the biggest goal for us should be to have the discussion with a lot of narratives also in the political area.
Oh, I cannot agree more. Personally, I'm all for that, and I will support that also with the conclusions of the conference. But one thing that you mentioned, which I find really interesting, is obviously this point of saying that people hear different narratives and they get confused. This sense of cognitive dissonance, and the fact that if you say, "Do we want food for everyone?" Everyone agrees, and then you say, "Yes, but we want organic food and we want cheap food and we want everything and we want it all to be perfect." And you were mentioning before, Alfred, the complexity. And do you think there is a way in which we can have a narrative that reflects this complexity, so that when you speak to people, you don't always have, that, yes, everyone agrees on all the good things without actually being willing to compromise on some of maybe the more complex issues or side effects or unwanted side effects of new technologies?
For me, as a farmer, I'm very much in innovation, and I try to rethink things and rethink methods, and try to find out how it was done, let's say 100 years ago, for example, when we didn't have several technologies. So not to develop some things, some process, some methods further, but try to cut them down and start from scratch and start from the beginning and start to see not the solutions that we already have, but really try to see it from a completely different perspective. And that's innovation. And organic agriculture is really strong in innovation. So there is a lot of innovation coming up We try to mimic nature. We try to see what is going on in nature. There is a saying that nature solved every problem that we have in the world. And there's a new way of studying, it's called biomimicry, to mimic nature. And these are directions where I see organic farming going into. And when I see the new gene editing methods, I'm sure there are a lot of goals that scientists and companies try to aim for, and try to reduce pesticide, what would be great for organic farming, for example, no need for pesticide for diseases. But then you still have, you see, for example, if you develop a variety, specific variety, then after 5-10 years you see that these issues, they catch up. Is it weed? Then we have super weed, or is it diseases which develop further, and then they find a way to work around these our solutions, and we have to develop further and further. So for me, and as an organic farmer, it's difficult to involve new gene editing methods. And even in Austria, there is a rare agreement between politicians, the industry, the farmers, consumer associations, who agreed not to produce genetic modified organisms in Austria. And that was already 15 years ago. So we're not talking about the new methods, but the old methods. And there's an agreement about that, and that developed a niche market. So we are now exporting corn starch, for example, to the USA to use it for organic baby food or for convenience products. So in Austria, it's even a niche, and even the conventional growers do not use genetic modified, not only the organic. So if we bring that in, then we probably mix that up, and I see that really difficult.
No, I think it's very positive. You mentioned that Austria's position, and if I compared with what Thea was saying before, narratives are so important. Actually, if you look at the European Parliament, when you're working on there any vote on new technologies, people are not voting according to education basis or according to party affiliation. It's all national, because that's where you're building your storylines. That really shows the power of narratives. But Anne, you're a very strong supporter of conversations and narratives and these kind of things. What are your views, if you're hearing what the rest of the panelists are saying on this, as the scientist on the panel?
Well, when I was listening to Alfred's feeling about the holistic approach and that nature is really perfect, a lot of the mechanisms are there. As a scientist and as a breeder, this is also something that we really believe in. And in developing new varieties, year after year, we look at the natural diversity of, for example, let's take tomato as an example. We look at wild species, they grow in the mountains of Peru. They have like tomato fruits that are like this big, but a lot of the natural resistances are in there. And what we do year after year is look for them, select them, and cross them in. It's like really, it's tedious work where you make the cross, and your first cross doesn't even look like anything you could actually bring to the market and eat. But by further crossing this with an elite variety, and this takes years. For example, for onion, it can take up to 18 years because it's a very slow crop. We do this time after time again. We get a new resistance that came originally from nature into the seed. So it's also a way in a holistic approach to really bring resistances to the market. And it's true, it's a constant fight because also nature, the diseases evolve. So we need to keep on bringing new resistance. Like in lettuce, it's every couple of years the resistance gets broken. So this interaction with nature is something as a scientist that we believe in and we study. I did learn, though, that whenever we had this narrative about using technology, my natural drive was to go and show the data and the excitement I had about the technology. But what I had to learn is also to listen to people's fears. And that's not about science and data, but that is a very different level. And that I made many mistakes, too, when I was younger and enthusiastic. And still, I'm learning that it's not just about the science, but it's also about the regulatory and the religion, but mostly what people feel. And there are no data that can help in that narrative. And that is something I think scientists, there are many here, it's something to learn, and also something in companies. We need to do that much better, listen to all of you.
We're all mutants, and I think that's something that one of the members of the group of chief scientific advisors remind us. We're all mutants. We all have mutations throughout, and yes, it is a battle in nature, and this is a constant thing. And I think that what you point out, and maybe I'd like to go back to Father Joseph here, is seeing that we're in this constant battle for survival, and how important do you think is about setting where we want to go? Where is Rome, as we started the conversation, in guiding us through these very complex societal debates, where you're seeing on the one hand, obviously, it might be, the sustainability of farming, and on the other hand, it's lives of people who are affected by malaria in Africa. How can you bring all that, and how can you create a vision of where Rome is? Do you think that is possible?
That's $1 million question.
We brought you here for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's interesting, the question about nature. I think there's, at least in the Christian tradition, there's quite a bit of reflection on human nature and humans' relationship with nature. So I think, rather than give you an answer, I think there is like this narrative. The word of narrative is very, very much according to religious traditions. Usually there are many stories, of what humanity has gone through. The biblical narratives, or even non-biblical, like even traditions from Hinduism or Buddhism, whatever. They also have all these traditional wisdom, usually given out in forms of stories and narratives that can guide us towards, say, like what you should do, what is bad, in a way that is not, it's soft. It's soft, it's not saying do this and don't do that. It's not, because I think that's what we are today. We're very much involved in like a legal framework or governance framework saying how should we control this and that. Whereas religious traditions tends to be much more softer. It gives you kind of like a narrative, but doesn't say, so what? It said, well, this is a story. Just learn to be wise. I think those kind of narratives is interesting, and we should kind of somehow incorporate them into the conversation. Like, the Christian tradition would be something like the Tower of Babel, something that, that hubris, trying to reach heavens with your technology, whatever, and then in the end it was didn't too well. That kind of thing. So I think there are a lot of things there that we could explore. And I'm not sure I answered your questions.
I think it's brilliant, because I love the fact that you say we have to learn to be wise. And I always feel a bit that we're living in a time where we have more knowledge than ever before. We're more intelligent than ever before to some extent. But at the same time, on one sense, we are more stupid than ever before as well. I take the example, the one I love is the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written texts ever. And in there, we're talking about chopping trees and forests, about the importance of preserving forests, because if you take too much, then it's not going to be there. So the sustainability of the biodiversity, and this is, long before. I'm Swedish. We weren't even there at that point. And the importance of wisdom, and perhaps narratives and society can create that wisdom, because I'm having. If you're seeing what's happening now in Europe with the Greta Thunberg movement, and not only in Europe, but the conversation is going towards sustainability, about the awareness of the impact of humanity on nature, about the fact that the bees are dying and insects are and I love the statistics where they said if we kill all insects on the planet will only survive will survive less than a week. If we kill all humans on the planet, well, the rest of the planet will be very happy. And I think that that's a very important point about that we're trying to conserve our habitat. How do we do that? And And that links back to what you were saying, Betty. How do we create a narrative and a vision where it's about making sure that we are maintaining a sustainable habitat for human beings to live in well, and that's both health-wise and also in agriculture and in the biosphere. Is this something that you can relate to in terms of how the conversations are going also in Uganda on the use of these technologies?
I see it in Uganda. We really look at gene editing as something that is for real, but we look at it as a dream. Why? Because we see as if it will work within some decades to come, depending on the level of technology we have. So when you try to talk to people, they really tell you, that's just a dream of scientists. I think it's not so much applicable or much achievable. And but we are really expectant to see that if we could have a free malaria world, a free malaria nation, and I believe there everybody will appreciate science. But for now, we just feel, even if somebody comes and tells you about the gene editing, we just look at it as just a story, and which we see maybe it will work in 100 years to come. And we really feel, depending on the critical moment that we are in, how malaria is affecting the nation, how malaria is affecting people's lives, we need something that when you tell us that we want to do gene editing, it really comes within a short time. So for us to achieve that, we need to be so sure. As a community, we really want to have those sure results. When people come and tell us about something, about that new tool they're bringing, and they try it out, not just as a matter of trying it out and you leave it on the way, but if it really works out, let them be committed to complete the system, so that we can also remember ourselves and we say that because of gene editing, we are now free. Malaria is now a story in Africa as well, or as Uganda. So I don't know how scientists will really, how this method can really be so quick and so fast, because concerning the health issues, not like these other colleagues of mine who are, but we are losing so many people almost every day because of malaria. We needed it to be so quick and fast that if it could really replace these other tools which are there, which have not been so much efficient or so much effective, and you come in. So I think with the help of other people or other scientists who are here, I really need to go back with some clear answer, because the community sent me, I tried to tell people, like, you must come with a clear answer, whether those scientists are really able to use that method within a short time given, so that we can appreciate it and welcome it in all other regions, because since it's just starting in one area, just where the Uganda virus is, the Uganda Virus Institute, what about by the time they cover the entire nation? How will it be? How will those lives be? Because since if it's so much a threat in the nation as malaria, so how are we going to handle it? But for the health part, we really appreciate and we really welcome the gene editing method, since we see it is the best which can handle malaria at stake now.
Well, thank you. I think that is very, very, very concise and very to the point. So I think everyone afterwards come with the concrete ideas to Betty on how to go ahead now. But I see that everyone is a little bit shy. I haven't received any questions from there they are. Okay, thank you. That's why I haven't been reading them. I haven't actually been seeing them, despite my glasses. So I think the most popular question seems to be, and I will ask them, I will see which panelists think want to respond to them. Are the current regulatory frameworks adequate for balancing innovation with protection?
No, I don't think so. The regulations in Europe are based on a system that's 20 years old. And new breeding technologies are now mainstream. It are enabling technologies. It's really a technological driver, so we need new regulation about that. Some people perhaps argue that it would be the best to put all the regulations aside, but I think that's not a good idea. If you do that, you neglect all the risks of the new breeding technologies. Safety is not proven yet. We know not a lot about it now. And also, when you put the GMO regulations aside, it's not necessary anymore to label the products that made with GMO techniques. And I think it's very important for the public and for the people and the consumers, for instance, that they know what they are buying. So labeling is very important for me. But I think we need a new system of regulations that first starts with see how big the risk is, and when the risk is very big, you have more regulations, so to say, and when the risk is less big, the regulations scheme can be a little bit more gentle.
So you think there should be a balance between what we're calling the precautionary principle and the innovation principle. If I do say too much jargon, you can do like this, and I will. I have the very bad tendency of talking in Brussels, as they say. But I'll link that into the question that came afterwards, which is like, how can we avoid the use of CRISPR in agriculture, the use of CRISPR in agriculture will walk the same path as GMOs? And I'd like to engage Alfred in this, because you were mentioning GMOs before. But I'm sorry to say they already have. The European Court of Justice decision of last year actually places the use of CRISPR within the GMO directive, and I think this is one of the key things, that the reasons why actually the chief scientific advisors, so these are independent scientists that advise the European Commission, came out with a statement which is not prescriptive. It doesn't say what you should do, but it just says that the current system is already 20 years old, and as you were saying, it's inadequate to where science is now. But in the broader sense of regulation, I know that Alfred, do you have a perspective on?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, the European Union has an opinion on that. So it is considered the same at the end, or till now. I'm worried a bit that will be softened in the future. But for me, it's still difficult. I think it is the same, and I'm quite happy with that decision, to be honest. So I don't see a reason to open that.
And would you like to comment on this?
So, one of the things that sometimes keeps me awake, and I spent 14 years of my life in America being in a startup community, and I still have a lot of friends there. There are a lot of resources and people committed to work on gene editing and using it to make small changes like the ones that occur also naturally to really improve the seeds that go to the market. This is for the Latin America market, the America market, the Asia market. They have these tools available for the consumer, but also for the farmer. And my concern is, and I really hope we have a lot of debate on that, like, are we doing the right thing in Europe? Is this where we are now? Will there soon be a new discussion on new regulation to have maybe a third way or a different way to regulate it, so we can also use in a safe way, of course, for environment and for people, this technology, and use it to speed up the breeding process, and even sometimes a mutation that you find in nature, if you can recreate it with CRISPR, because it's very precise, you don't have to deal with all this, we call it linkage drag, this baggage that is in a wild crop that when you cross, it sticks with it, and sometimes it really reduces the nutritional value or the yield in the field. And I really hope we do this wisely, and we keep on discussing this and make sure we make the right decision. And regarding organic, and I would love to continue the discussion later on today with you, Alfred, it's all about less resources, using less nutrient compounds on the field, or only natural compounds, using less chemicals on the field. If we can make, in a fast way, these changes to bring the traits to the farmer, we might also, and that depends on the definition of organic, which is different in different countries and environments, we can probably provide a crop with less impact on the environment.
Father Joseph, you wanted to come into this
Yeah, it's always been mystery to me why, in terms of precaution, there's more precaution towards food, genetic engineering, than genetic engineering on human beings and embryo. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you apply so much precaution to food that is, I guess it's important, food is important, but then when it comes to the human embryo or the human genome, all precaution is thrown out of the windows. I don't know, it's just a mystery to me why that happens. I mean, it's just a reality that I recognize, but it's always been.
There's some fascinating work in neuroscience on that, precisely say that precise problem is explained by our own genes, actually, by the fact that we are terrified by ingesting something poisonous. That's one of our biggest defenders, and that's why we care so much more about green biotech than maybe white biotech, in one sense. But Alfred, you wanted to make a quick comment.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick comment on that. I fully agree with you when you say you breed a variety that is the method that was used was within the species, so you don't add another gene from another species, things like that. That's very just like breeding with the bees. But what comes up to that risk, and I already mentioned, we have a series of risks, and that's the problem. So we do not only have one risk, which is for plant production, for example, and the disease jumps up on this specific variety. We also have other problems. We have a few companies that dominate the seed market. So 4 or 5 companies dominate 60% of the seed market, and they are very powerful. And I see, as an entrepreneur, the reason why they are. So I fully understand, as a company wants to make progress, wants to make development, but then they patent something. Yeah, and it's a difference if you patent the design of a chair or if you patent food. So food is quite essential for all of us. So probably it's the most essential thing. And if we start patenting it, so there is power created. And that adds up to these plant cultivation issues. So you have another issue. So that's a series of problems that we have to face when we talk about gene editing methods. And if we have a successful breed variety that dominates the market because you can reduce pesticide, which is positive because we want to protect the environment, and that would be, let's say, these type of varieties would have a share of 60, 70%, or 50 or 40% of the worldwide wheat production, and then a disease jumps up, or the companies decide to raise the license. So it's difficult, and that's the reason nature is so successful, because it's so diverse. And if we stop that diversity, we stop that multi-staker approach, and we are dominating things because they are successful, this is getting dangerous.
Well, you mentioned the problems of regulation. Actually, how do we coordinate, and how do we make sure that somebody doesn't, become the sole owner of all the production of food? Yeah. But I think that the complexity, and now I know we have 5 minutes left, so I want to give you the time to do final comments. But I just wanted to before that, and I'll work in the last question that's in that, and obviously the last question is, if CRISPR could help improve overall biodiversity, would that be a logical reason for an organic grower to encourage use of edited crops? And the reason why I would like to take this in, because I think what we've seen here is the complexity of the conversation, the huge potential, even in helping with creating biodiversity and in affecting. And also I think to some extent the misunderstanding of how the current regulation works, because currently it is, as you were mentioning, it's very out of date, and it's legal still it's much easier and much cheaper to use radiation, which is much more dangerous for environment than and I think there's a very big misunderstanding between actually how the current regulation works. So one, maybe how do we adapt it to today without being prescriptive how that should be, and how can we work with narratives to create this fundamental wisdom about the complexity of the question, and how do we make that complexity part of the Rome that we're going towards. So I'd like to change the way now. I'd like to start with Father Joseph. Last comments, try to keep it to one or 2 minutes. I
didn't answer the question. What do you have to comment on?
Question would be on, So these are your final comments
Okay.
on the whole debate.
Okay, on that.
So I
Okay.
wanted to I just gave a little bit of an update. The last question is actually regarding if CRISPR, Cas and other genome
Okay.
technology can help with actually increasing biodiversity. Is this
Right.
something that will be positive? And I think that underlines the fundamental question isn't it where we're going that's important as opposed to what
Right.
technologies we're using, and how does that...
In some way, I mean, the ultimate question is, what is the common good? I think we all want the same thing in the end. We all want what is best for, I guess, humanity before, in some way, nature, because the environment and the food and all that is part of what, I mean, I guess I'm kind of anthropocentric in the sense that I think that there is a certain importance for human beings in the whole ecosystem. And so in some way, I think that is a balance there, right? The common good for human beings, and then the good of the whole entire nature. But I think that's subordinate to the human good above all. I think that at least from a more like a Christian perspective, there's always been tension there. There's always been tension there, and it's also good to recognize that. So, I mean, that's probably
That's
what I
where
have
the
to say.
tension
Yes.
lies.
Yes.
Alfred, last comments?
Yeah, I already talked a little bit about the last question. I think the reason why I don't see, even if it's improving overall biodiversity, I don't see that. I see other risks. So I already talked about that. Finally, my comment is I really appreciate this discussion here, and it's open, and that's really nice. What I see, I'm worried. I think you already recognize that a little bit. And I think what we are aiming for is we have to feed the planet. We have to solve the climate crisis. We have to stop the loss of biodiversity. So these are the big problems, and I hope all the companies are facing these problems, are trying to help to solve these problems. And there I see other methods that are not that risky. So if we reduce the food waste, for example, yeah? So we have to increase our productivity by 60%. We have food waste by 30, 40, 50%, considering which study you read. So if we reduce feeding livestock and go more on a plant-based diet, if we increase the knowledge of small-scale farmers, and they feed, according to scientists, 75 to 80% of the food, the worldwide produced food is coming from small-scale farmers. If we increase the knowledge by 10%, wow, that's an effect. So if we take these three methods, which have no risk, that's what I would propose, instead of getting in with new technology. But I fully understand the curiosity of the scientists. I fully understand the industry who tries to develop something unique and tries to sell it. I fully understand that, but it's quite essential what we're talking about. So therefore...
Right. So Bessie, do you want to comment on that?
I think my final thing should be this. I've discovered, even from these other speakers of mine, I see it is more, really, it is a need to use the method, though it's just the fear of how. And even still in the area of malaria, it's just how. But I see it is more needed, and it is urgent, since it is catering food, health, and if at all you could have the free malaria world, which has enough food, I see we shall be progressing on very well. And I see if at all that this method is used, medically modified mosquitoes could be used. We see, in my perspective, that as the African continent, or as a nation, Uganda, for us would have also saved a lot of money which we've been spending on medication and such type of things. Maybe we could even use our money for developmental issues. So we really welcome the modification, as long as we are really more sure about these modified mosquitoes, what they are yet to do, and if at all they don't have those many negative effects on us, we welcome it, and we take it home as I represent my entire community.
Thank you. Anne, final comments.
To close, I want to say again that to solve all these big problems related to the climate, the food supply, the growing population, we need all help we can get of everybody probably in this room, but also of organic farming. One of the big contributions of organic farming is that it's been used much more in the mainstream farming. We see many methods used. And also CRISPR, if I see, because you commented on the risk of, and I know I wear now a label of a big company today as well, that there is a risk of big companies really engaging in it. What I see in the US and in Asia is that there is a lot of engagement from smaller companies, smaller seed companies, smaller crops, because of the framework and the environment that are investing and using it. So it's, I believe we need all help we can get, and I really believe CRISPR-Cas should be a tool for everybody to use in a safe and wise way, taking everybody's concern into account, but also compromise, because the only way we can move forward is by compromising, not on important parts, but on little steps here and there to really make sure we move forward, because getting stuck is probably the worst decision that we can take.
So final words to conclude the panel.
Yeah, I agree with Alfred. There are a lot of other things we can do to save the planet. We should put a lot of energy and scientific research and money on that other topics. Alfred mentioned them already. And I think for breeding technology, it is very important to keep different roads that lead to Rome. To keep the roads open, to protect them, and also to respect that there are people, or perhaps even countries that choose for a non-GMO road. And I think also in Europe it's very important that you develop regulations that respect that there are different roads.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to give a big round of applause to the panelists.